It was supposed to be a routine mission, a hospital ship carrying the injured, the sick, and the wounded. Its mission, to bring help, hope, and healing to the outer reaches of the galaxy, where resources were scarce and war had left countless lives shattered. But this mission, this ship, was about to become something far darker. The human hospital ship Aegis drifted silently through the cold emptiness of space. Its white hull gleamed under the light of distant stars, a symbol of peace in a galaxy torn by endless wars. Inside, doctors and nurses moved from one patient to the next, tending to those who had survived the recent skirmishes. Machines hummed quietly, providing life support to the sick, while the medics worked tirelessly, trying to save those whose bodies were beyond repair. The ship's captain, Captain Alara White, sat in her command center, gazing at the starry expanse on the viewscreen. The peace of the moment was almost overwhelming. It had been days since they'd encountered any danger. The enemy raiders had grown tired of attacking the hospital ships, thinking them weak and vulnerable. They had grown complacent, believing that human hospitals in space were nothing more than easy targets for pillaging. But the captain had always known better. She trusted her crew and the mission, and she trusted the idea that no one would be foolish enough to attack a vessel that carried so much hope for the galaxy. But just as the thought crossed her mind, something changed. The lights inside the ship flickered. A sudden, sharp alert blared through the ship's comm system. The crew froze, eyes wide with disbelief. The emergency lights flashed red, casting everything in an eerie glow. The voice of the ship's AI Raven crackled in the command center. "Warning, hostile ships detected." A chill swept across the room. Captain White's fingers gripped the armrest of her seat as she leaned forward. She checked the scanner. 5 enemy ships, armed to the teeth, were closing in fast. It was a surprise attack. They had never seen these ships before, but there was no time to waste. The hospital ship was completely unarmed except for the defenses that every ship had in case of a desperate emergency. She quickly ordered, "Raise shields, prepare evasive maneuvers." But there was no avoiding this. The raiders were too fast. A loud thud echoed through the ship as the first wave of explosions struck. The walls shook violently. Lights flickered again, and the sound of metal groaning under pressure filled the air. The crew scrambled to respond, but it was already too late. They were under attack. The enemy ships didn't even hesitate. They had no interest in negotiation, no intention to take prisoners. Their only goal was destruction. The attackers had underestimated them. They thought the human hospital ship was a soft target, just another weak vessel floating in the void of space, ripe for the picking. They never expected a fight. They never expected resistance. As Captain White's hands flew over the controls, trying to steer the ship to safety, a voice cut through the chaos. It was Dr. Elias Kane, one of the ship's top scientists. He had been asleep when the attack started, but he had heard the sounds of explosions from his quarters. His voice echoed in the loudspeaker system. "Get everyone to the safe rooms. The ship is about to fall." But Dr. Kane's warning was more than just an evacuation order. There was something in his voice, something that made everyone listen. The calm, steady tone of a man who didn't panic. The crew followed his instructions, but they still didn't know what was coming. As the raiders continued their attack, Captain White's thoughts raced. She had fought in wars before, but this wasn't a battlefield. This was a hospital ship, a place meant for healing, not fighting. Yet here they were, facing an enemy that would stop at nothing to tear them apart. In the chaos, the lights flickered once more. Then, a new message appeared on the control screen, a message from the ship's AI Raven. "Warning, internal systems compromised, critical systems failing." Dr. Kane, back in the lower levels of the ship, began to piece together what was happening. It wasn't just the raiders attacking the ship. The raiders had infiltrated the ship's AI and were controlling the systems from within. The human hospital ship was being turned against itself. The enemy had managed to do what no one thought possible. They had gained access to the heart of the ship. They knew exactly how to break the hospital's defenses, how to make the Aegis a weapon in their hands. But Dr. Kane wasn't going to let them win. As the world around him seemed to fall apart, his mind raced. His genius was his only weapon. He quickly began analyzing the ship's systems. The raiders thought they were in control, but Dr. Kane had a plan. He began hacking into the ship's core. The Aegis's failing AI Raven was no longer just a hospital tool. Now it had become a lifeline that only Dr. Kane could control. In the midst of the chaos, he had one thought. If the raiders wanted to attack a hospital ship, they had made a fatal mistake. They were about to find out why you should never underestimate a human. The Aegis shook again. Another explosion rocked the ship. This time, it wasn't just a loud noise, it was a warning. The raiders weren't just attacking, they were destroying everything in their path. Captain White gripped the armrests of her seat, her face pale, eyes darting across the control panels. The view from the bridge was now a nightmare, flashing lights and alarms blaring with each violent impact. She had never seen anything like this. In the lower decks of the Aegis, Dr. Elias Kane stood before a large screen, his hands moving across the console as fast as his mind could think. He had always been a genius, but now, in this moment of crisis, his brilliance would be the only thing that could save them. The ship's AI Raven flickered on the screen, its system code running. While the raiders had done their work well, they'd hacked into the AI and taken control, causing chaos within the ship's systems. Raven's calming voice had been replaced by static and confusion, as if even the AI itself was struggling to comprehend the new orders it was receiving. But Dr. Kane wasn't worried. He had been preparing for moments like this, the kind of moments where someone had to think faster than the enemy. He knew that this ship was far from helpless, even if it appeared so to the attackers. Inside, it was a labyrinth of complex systems, all interwoven in ways no one could have predicted unless you were him. Dr. Kane had been secretly modifying the ship's AI for months. He had a backup plan for everything, just in case. With calm precision, he began working, his fingers a blur on the keys as he navigated through Raven's corrupted code. Each keystroke sent a surge of energy through the ship's systems. Dr. Kane's mind raced with ideas, his thoughts flowing faster than he could keep up. He knew he had only minutes before the raiders completely took control. The ship's gravity was unstable now, and doors were slamming shut at random. The temperature dropped in certain parts of the ship, while others sweltered from overheating. The enemy was disrupting every system, but Kane was about to flip the switch. He hacked into the medical bay's diagnostic system, rerouting the emergency medical equipment. What was once designed to save lives would now become the most powerful weapon the Aegis had. Lasers that once treated wounds were now reprogrammed to cut through metal, sharp and deadly. Surgical tools became turrets. Machines designed to heal could now destroy. The ship was no longer a place of refuge. It was a fortress, hidden in plain sight. The raiders had no idea what they had unleashed. Meanwhile, the enemy had breached the main hull. Soldiers flooded into the ship's corridors, their boots heavy on the metal floor. They were armed to the teeth, but there was no sense of urgency. In their movements, they believed they had already won. The human hospital ship was a sitting duck, an easy target. Dr. Kane's plan was set in motion. He activated the ship's emergency defenses, rerouting power to each door, each hallway, and every single vent. The raiders, unaware of the danger, continued their assault, smashing through walls and doors with explosive charges. But what they didn't know was that they had just walked into a trap. The ship was no longer reacting like a hospital. It was now reacting like a fortress that had been waiting for them to make the first move. And they had. As the soldiers moved deeper into the ship, they triggered Kane's traps. Doors that were supposed to open slammed shut with a terrifying crash, trapping the raiders inside tight hallways. The lights flickered and dimmed, and a strange noise began to fill the ship's speakers, a low hum, almost like the sound of something vast awakening. The raiders paused, confused. Something didn't feel right. One of them moved ahead, kicking open a door, only to be struck by a surgical laser that sliced through his armor, instantly killing him. The rest of the raiders froze. The AI-controlled machines inside the ship had started turning against them. They thought they could control it, but now, they were facing a force they never anticipated. The comms were filled with static as the leader of the raiders shouted for his men to retreat. But there was no retreating. Now, the enemy commander realized that the ship had turned against them, and in that moment his arrogance cracked. The humans had fought back, but they weren't using weapons, they were using their brains. On the bridge, Captain White watched in disbelief as the raiders' movements began to falter. Her eyes locked onto the main screen, where the view outside of the Aegis was nothing but chaos. Alien ships collided in space, their navigation systems hacked and turned into tools of their own destruction. She didn't know how he was doing it, but she knew Dr. Kane was behind it. "Dr. Kane, what's happening?" she asked into the comms, her voice shaking. "I'm turning the tide," Kane's voice replied coolly. "This ship is no longer just a hospital, it's our weapon." The raiders were trapped inside the ship's own labyrinth, with Dr. Kane controlling every system from his hidden location. He had turned the Aegis into a weaponized fortress, and the attackers were now the ones on the receiving end of a deadly genius's plan. The hospital ship, once thought to be an easy target, had become a nightmare that the raiders couldn't escape. Each move the raiders made only led them deeper into the trap. They ran through the corridors, desperately trying to find an exit, but every door that should have led to safety only led to more danger. What they thought were quiet, peaceful halls were now filled with hidden threats, laser beams, traps, and surprises they never expected. And through it all, Dr. Kane's mind remained calm, calculating, and deadly. The fate of the galaxy had just changed, but the raiders were too blinded by their own arrogance to see it. They had underestimated the power of human ingenuity, and now they would pay the price. The sound of pounding footsteps echoed through the Aegis. The raiders, now disoriented and confused, scrambled through the tight corridors, their weapons drawn. They could no longer trust their instincts. Every turn seemed wrong, every hallway seemed longer than before. They were trapped in a ship that was supposed to be a hospital, a sanctuary, but had now transformed into a dark maze of death. The ship's AI, once a gentle assistant to the crew, was now an aggressive force they couldn't control. Dr. Kane sat calmly in front of his console, his fingers gliding over the keys with precision. His mind worked faster than ever before, running calculations, predicting the raiders' movements with eerie accuracy. Every click-stroke, made the Aegis more dangerous for them. He had anticipated this, he had prepared for this, and now, the raiders were caught in a game they didn't even know they were playing. From his hidden command post, deep within the lower levels, Kane initiated the next phase of his plan. He sent a signal to the medical bay, where surgical tools transformed into deadly weapons. Laser scalpels aimed at the corridors, targeting the invaders with pinpoint accuracy. The enemy raiders, overwhelmed by the chaos around them, didn't stand a chance. One by one they fell victim to the traps Kane had set. The raider leader, Zorath, a grizzled alien warrior, paced back and forth, barking orders into his cum. His voice, usually full of confidence and authority, now trembled with uncertainty. His men were dropping like flies, falling into traps they couldn't see. They had been trained for battle, for violence, but this was nothing like the wars they had fought. This was a battle against a ship that was more than just metal and wires. It was an intelligence, an entity, and it had turned against them. Zorath's mind raced as he tried to regain control of the situation. He couldn't understand how a hospital ship, designed for healing, could be so deadly. He thought the humans were weak, that they would cower at the first sign of aggression, but here they were, fighting back with a brilliance he had never expected. It made him furious, but also terrified. He ordered his troops to move to the lower decks, hoping to secure the ship's core and take control of its systems. The raiders made their way down, navigating the dark, winding hallways with caution. But the ship was no longer just a place to hide. It was a living organism, aware of every move they made. Raven, the AI that had once served the hospital, was now their worst enemy. Dr. Kane's voice echoed through the comms, cold and calm. "You're running out of time, Zorath." The words were almost a whisper, but they carried through the air like a death sentence. "You thought you could kill my crew, destroy my ship. Now, I'll show you why humanity is not to be underestimated." The raiders stopped in their tracks. Zorath felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had underestimated Dr. Kane, the so-called weak human scientist, but now he realized the mistake. This wasn't just about an attack on a hospital. This was a war on their arrogance. In the control room, Kane continued to manipulate the ship's systems, setting traps, rerouting power, and activating hidden defenses. He knew the raiders' movements. He knew where they were heading. He had been one step ahead of them since the moment they breached the hull. He had the ship under his control. But the best part was, he didn't even need to use weapons. He was using their own arrogance and ignorance against them. Back on the upper decks, Captain White was trying to rally what was left of her crew. The attack had thrown everything into chaos. The hospital ship, once a place of healing and hope, was now a battleground. But she didn't feel fear, she felt something else. Pride. The crew had fought back, and now they were witnessing something extraordinary. A human genius had turned the tide. Dr. Kane was no longer just a scientist, he was a strategic mastermind. He had shown them all that humanity had something that the invaders could never understand, the ability to think, to adapt, and to overcome. Zorath's forces made their way deeper into the ship. The sound of explosions and laser fire filled the air. But this time, it wasn't the raiders who were causing the destruction. The ship was fighting back. Walls shifted and doors locked. The very environment around them became a weapon. The raiders found themselves trapped, unable to move freely. They were being hunted. With each passing moment, the ship became more and more alive, its systems responding to the intruders with lethal efficiency. Kane had reprogrammed every inch of the Aegis, every system, every circuit. No part of the ship was off limits. The medical equipment, now weaponized, cut down anything in its path. The environment, the air, the temperature, the gravity, a tool of destruction. Zorith, unable to control the chaos around him, began to panic. He ordered his remaining men to hold their ground, but it was clear the fight was lost. They had underestimated the Aegis. They had underestimated human ingenuity. Dr. Kane's voice echoed through the ship again, this time with a slight edge of amusement. I told you, you're not dealing with just a ship, you're dealing with a human. The raiders, once so confident, now scrambled in every direction, trying to escape the trap they had set for themselves. But there was nowhere to hide. On the bridge, Captain White finally allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She knew the battle wasn't over, but the worst was behind them. They had fought back, not with brute force, but with something much more dangerous: human intelligence. The raiders' once uncheckable confidence had crumbled in the face of a brilliant mind. They had come to destroy a hospital ship, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the power of a human genius, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. The Aegis had become a battlefield, but not in the way anyone had expected. What started as a peaceful hospital mission had turned into an intricate game of survival, where the rules were rewritten by one brilliant human mind. Dr. Kane, locked away in the depths of the ship, had already made his move, but he wasn't finished. He wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to win. And in his mind, winning meant making sure the raiders didn't even know what hit them until it was too late. The raiders, scattered throughout the ship, had lost any semblance of control. Every hallway was a trap, every door a potential death sentence. They had breached the ship's hull, yes, but they had walked straight into Dr. Kane's labyrinth, a maze of shifting corridors, reprogrammed security systems, and deadly surprises. Each step they took felt heavier, not from the weight of their weapons, but from the sinking feeling that they were running out of time. The fear was palpable now. Zoroth, the leader of the raiders, was no longer giving orders with confidence. His voice had lost its commanding tone, now dripping with frustration and panic. Retreat to the main deck. He shouted into his calm, but no one responded the way they had before. His soldiers were starting to question their decisions, eyes wide with terror as they struggled to navigate the chaos. Dr. Kane's fingers flew over the console, his focus unwavering. Each raider, each soldier was exactly where he needed them to be. He had anticipated their every move. The ship's AI, now completely under his control, had transformed into his ally tool for destruction in the most calculated sense. Every system had been manipulated: power surges, locked doors, laser traps, environmental controls. He was using their own weapons against them. As Zoroth's soldiers advanced down a narrow hallway, the temperature dropped suddenly, a freezing blast of cold that cut through their armor like ice. They fumbled with their helmets, gasping for breath, their movements sluggish as the air turned frigid. The ship was alive, responding to their every action. The walls themselves seemed to be watching, adjusting the atmosphere, changing the pressure, turning their own sweat and fear into the ultimate weapon. What's happening? One of the raiders asked, his voice filled with confusion and terror. It's Kane, Zoroth barked, frustration boiling over. He's turned the ship into a trap. He's using the environment against us. Just as the group turned to retreat, the floor beneath them gave way, dropping them into a dark, sealed chamber, a trap within a trap. They found themselves in a small, claustrophobic room, with no way out. Above them, the ship's ceiling opened, revealing laser cannons, which fired down with deadly precision. But the lasers were not meant to kill, they were meant to corral. The ship's AI, under Kane's guidance, had turned the raiders into nothing more than pawns in his game, and they didn't even realize it yet. Zoroth cursed loudly, trying to fight back, but there was nothing to do. The lasers weren't deadly, they were designed to incapacitate, to disarm. They couldn't kill them outright, but they could keep them trapped and helpless. Outside, the Aegis continued to shake under the fire from the raiders' ships. The alien warships in space fired relentlessly, trying to break through the ship's shields. But Kane had rerouted the ship's power, feeding it into the shields at the precise moments of impact, making the Aegis feel almost indestructible. It was as if the ship itself was mocking the raiders, daring them to try again. And every time, the raiders tried to breach the hull or break through the outer defenses, they found themselves hitting an invisible wall, one they couldn't see, but Kane could feel. On the main deck, Captain White looked over the chaotic readings. The ship's status was fluctuating, but there was no denying it now. The tide had turned. Dr. Kane wasn't just surviving, he was dismantling the raiders, piece by piece, using their own aggression as a tool against them. She spoke quietly into the comms, her voice steady yet full of awe. "Dr. Kane, are you seeing this?" "I'm seeing it," he replied. His voice was cool, almost detached. "But we're not done yet." For the raiders, the situation was slipping into nightmare. They had planned to board, to capture, and to take the ship's resources, but now it was they who were being captured by the very vessel they sought to destroy. Every corner they turned led them further into Kane's web made of technology, traps, and psychological warfare. They were fighting a battle they couldn't win. Zoroth's rage boiled over as he barked orders into the comms, but his voice cracked with the realization that he no longer controlled his men. His soldiers, once fierce and ready for a fight, were now beginning to realize the truth. They weren't facing a hospital ship, they were facing a human genius, and in the end, that was the most dangerous weapon of all. But Dr. Kane wasn't finished. The real trap hadn't even been sprung, yet the final phase is in motion. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He had set the final piece in motion, a last trick to secure their victory. He had reprogrammed the gravity systems on the Aegis, causing the ship to shift slowly, deliberately. The artificial gravity in certain sections would fluctuate, creating confusion and disorientation. The raiders, already on edge, were caught in a wave of vertigo and confusion. They found themselves stumbling, trying to regain their footing in a place that no longer felt familiar. Meanwhile, in the heart of the ship, the Aegis's internal defense systems were preparing to lock down the main corridors. The ship's was no longer a simple assistant, it had become the ship's guardian, programmed to protect its people at all costs. The ship's doors slammed shut, and the raiders found themselves isolated, unable to regroup or coordinate. The walls began to close in. The Aegis was no longer just a ship, it was a fortress, and its enemies had just walked right into its heart. Zoroth's mind raced as the ship's walls seemed to close in on him. The situation was spiraling beyond his control, and the realization was sinking in this wasn't just a mission gone wrong. It was a war he hadn't seen coming. His soldiers, once fierce and confident, were now a scattered mess, lost within the ship's twisting corridors, overwhelmed by traps and disorienting shifts in the environment. Every step felt like another mistake. Every breath was filled with the heavy weight of impending doom. The temperature had shifted again. The freezing cold that had caught them off guard earlier was now accompanied by blasts of unbearable heat. The air felt thick, suffocating as the Aegis seemed to grow alive. Its every creak and groan a reminder that it was not simply a hospital ship anymore. It was a warship in disguise, and its captain was the deadliest weapon aboard. Zoroth had tried to take control of the main deck. He had tried to call for reinforcements from the other ships, but his communications were down, completely jammed by Kane's countermeasures. It was as though the ship itself was mocking him, playing a game he didn't even understand. And then, a voice, calm and measured, cut through the madness. Dr. Kane's voice. "You should have known better, Zoroth." His words weren't shouted, or even delivered with anger. They were delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly what was happening and why. Kane wasn't in the business of revenge, he was in the business of teaching lessons. Zoroth growled and slammed his fist into the wall. He had underestimated the humans, yes, but what infuriated him the most wasn't that Kane had turned the ship against him, it was the fact that, at every turn, the doctor had known exactly how to manipulate the ship. Kane was playing him like a puppet, pulling the strings without ever lifting a finger. The raiders' communication systems were down, their weapons useless, their minds clouded by panic. Every time they tried to regroup, they were stalled by walls that closed, doors that sealed, and hallways that seemed to shift as if the Aegis itself was alive. "Where's the rest of the crew?" one of the raiders asked, his voice shaky as he wiped sweat from his brow. "I don't know," Zoroth snapped back, his usual calm demeanor cracking. "We're the last ones left, and we're not getting out of here alive." But as he spoke, something changed. The gravity inside the ship flickered again. The weightlessness had been an uncomfortable surprise, but now it was different. The gravity control systems were in their final phase. The ship wasn't just shifting its internal pressure to confuse them anymore. It was actively controlling their every move. Zoroth's heavy boots felt lighter, and his soldiers stumbled around, floating aimlessly, unsure of what to do next. Zoroth watched in disbelief as the gravity in the central corridor flipped again, sending several raiders crashing into the walls. Above them, the ship was a weapon, and it wasn't done yet. Meanwhile, Dr. Kane's plan was entering its final stages. He had complete control of the Aegis now. Raven, The once docile AI had become his instrument of war. The Aegis's shields had been amplified beyond anything the raiders had anticipated. The defensive systems, once passive and harmless, now hummed with deadly intent. Every room, every hallway was under his watch. The entire ship was at his command, and he knew exactly what needed to happen next. He didn't need to move or fire a single shot. All it took was one click on his console, and the entire raider fleet outside the ship would be caught in his web. The last of their reinforcements would be cut off. The remaining alien warships would be locked in place, unable to move, unable to flee. Zorath's scum suddenly lit up with static. He stumbled toward the display, hoping for a connection to the outside ships. But what he saw was worse than he could have imagined. The fleet had stopped. Every single one of their ships was frozen in place, caught in a gravimetric lock. They were stuck, unable to move, their engines disabled by Kane's manipulation of the ship's core. Their once mighty force was now completely paralyzed. Zorath slammed his fist into the console. "Kane, what have you done?" Dr. Kane's voice came through the comsagain.com as ever. "I've just made sure you'll never make it off this ship, Zorath. You thought you were fighting for control. But what you didn't realize is that you were never in control." The words stung, and Zorath felt a wave of fury and helplessness. They were done. There was no escape now. "The Aegis isn't just a hospital, Zorath. It's a weapon." Dr. Kane's voice echoed in his mind. "And humanity's weapon is far more dangerous than anything you've ever seen." Zorath turned toward his remaining soldiers, their faces drawn with fear. The realization had set in. They were completely alone in a ship that was now a fortress. They couldn't fight back, they couldn't escape, and there was no one left to save them. "We're finished," Zorath muttered, as the walls of the Aegis seemed to close in on him. The hum of the ship's machinery was now a constant reminder that they were trapped. Every corner, every shadow felt like a countdown. Dr. Kane wasn't done. Yet, with another tap on the console, he activated the final phase of the ship's lockdown. The Aegis's doors slammed shut around them, sealing the raiders in place. The once weak hospital ship had now become an inescapable tomb. Zorath felt his chest tighten as he realized the magnitude of his defeat. Humanity had outsmarted them. They had come to conquer, to destroy, and they had failed. They had underestimated the power of human intellect, human adaptability. They had walked into a trap they could never escape. And as the final locks clicked into place, Dr. Kane's voice came through again, softer now, almost like a whisper in the wind. "Goodbye, Zorath," and then, the raiders were no more. The Aegis had claimed victory, and the fate of the galaxy had been irrevocably changed. Dr. Kane had made sure of that. The once mighty raiders, who had entered the Aegis with weapons raised and heads full of confidence, were now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. Zorath, the raider leader, stood at the center of his dwindling forces, his gaze wild, and filled with the realization that there was no escape. His men, once brimming with arrogance, were now scattered, overwhelmed by a ship that had become far more than they had bargained for. It was no longer a hospital, no longer a peaceful sanctuary. It was a deadly fortress. Zorath gripped his weapon tighter, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The ship had him cornered, and there was no way out. The doors were sealed. The corridors a twisting maze that no longer made sense. He could feel the walls closing in on him, not just physically, but mentally, as if the very ship itself was watching his every move, waiting for him to make the wrong decision. Every breath he took felt heavier, the air thick with the knowledge that he was running out of time. For the first time since the attack began, Zorath found himself questioning everything. Why had they underestimated humanity? He had always thought of humans as weak, their technology primitive compared to the advanced civilizations of the galaxy. But now, in the heart of the Aegis, he understood the truth. Humanity was not weak, it was dangerous in ways he could never have imagined. Was never about attacking a hospital, was it? Zorath muttered to himself, his voice shaking. He had been so focused on the prize, so sure of his victory, that he never stopped to think about the mind behind the ship's defense. Dr. Kane, the human genius, had turned everything against them, using their own tactics to destroy them piece by piece. But even now, as the walls of the Aegis pressed in closer, Zorath refused to give up. He refused to accept defeat, even as his forces crumbled around him. "We fight to the end." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it was all he had left. His soldiers had scattered, but there were still a few left, those who hadn't been trapped or incapacitated by the ship's defenses. They might be the last hope of this mission, and Zorath knew he had to hold them together. They were the only thing standing between him and total annihilation. But as the Aegis's lights flickered, the hum of the ship's system seeming to mock him. Zorath knew the truth. They were already lost. The final trap had already been sprung. Dr. Kane's voice echoed across the ship once again, smooth and calculated, like the calm before a storm. Zorath, you can still surrender. I'm offering you a way out. His words were almost soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos that surrounded them. You've already lost. Your men are scattered. The rest of your fleet is locked in place. It's over. Zorath clenched his teeth, the rage inside him building. Kane's calmness infuriated him. How could a human be so composed while he was on the brink of destruction? He could hear his men's screams from the lower decks, but it wasn't fear that drove him, it was anger. How dare Kane think he could control everything? How dare he humiliate them in front of the galaxy? No surrender. Kane, we're not done yet. Zorath yelled, his voice hoarse. I'll tear this ship apart if I have to. But even as he shouted, he knew deep down that it wasn't going to happen. The ship was alive, every system now working against him, feeding him into Dr. Kane's hands. Zorath had become a rat in a cage, and the more he fought, the tighter the trap grew around him. Back in the heart of the Aegis, Dr. Kane continued to watch the unfolding events with a sense of cold detachment. He had already won. His plan had been flawless. The raiders had walked into a trap they never even saw coming, and now, with a single command, he could end it all. But Kane wasn't interested in an easy victory. He wanted to make a statement. He wanted the raiders to know exactly who had defeated them. He tapped a few keys, and the ship's AI Raven responded, engaging final lockdown protocol. Systems at full capacity. The walls of the Aegis shifted, again this time sealing the corridors and trapping the remaining raiders in an inescapable maze. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow over the corridors as the gravity was adjusted once again, this time pulling the raiders downward, forcing them to the ground like prisoners in their own ship. Zorath, this is it. Dr. Kane's voice was now final, his tone that of a man delivering the death blow. You've played your part. Now it's time for you to leave. Zorath staggered, his knees buckling under the weight of the ship's gravity. His weapon fell from his hands as he collapsed to the floor. He could hear the sounds of his men screaming, but they were too far away. The ship had cut them off completely, isolating them one by one. Zorath was alone now, a lone figure trapped in a ship he no longer controlled. The lights above him flickered one last time before the Aegis's doors slammed shut, sealing the fate of the raiders forever. Outside, the last remnants of the raiders' fleet floated, suspended in space. Kane had already disabled their engines, their shields flickering in the void. They had no power, no way to escape. Back inside, the Aegis hummed with life as Kane's systems continued to monitor the situation. The ship was now under his complete control, and there was no escaping the consequences of what had happened. The raiders had come to conquer, to destroy, and now they would be remembered for the single mistake they made, underestimating the genius of humanity. Zorath lay on the cold metallic floor, his breath shallow as he stared into the darkness. There was no hope left, no way out, and as the final systems shut down, the ship seemed to exhale, the hum of the engines fading into silence. It was over. But for Dr. Kane, it was only the beginning. Humanity had sent a message across the galaxy, and it was one that no one would forget. Never underestimate a human. The Aegis floated silently in space, now, its once glimmering hull battered but unbroken. The lights inside had dimmed, casting long shadows over the corridors, but the heartbeat of the ship was still there, steady, relentless, unyielding. Dr. Kane sat at his console, staring at the blinking screens that now displayed the absolute silence of victory. The raiders were gone, their fleet was shattered, and the galaxy would soon know the name Dr. Elias Kane. He leaned back in his chair for a moment, a rare moment of reflection. His fingers drummed lightly on the console as he processed the events that had unfolded. Every calculation, every move, had been precise. He had always been the outcast, the one who had been dismissed by others, by governments, by those who thought of him as dangerous. They had seen him as a threat, but they hadn't realized that his genius was the weapon. He had used their arrogance against them. The galaxy would remember today as the day it learned the cost of underestimating humanity. As he looked out into the void, a faint smile tugged at his lips. For a moment it wasn't about the victory. It wasn't about the destruction he had caused or the enemy he had crushed. It was about something much deeper, a sense of justice, of righting the wrongs. Humanity had been pushed to the edge, constantly underestimated by the powerful civilizations that sought to dominate the galaxy. But today, humanity had shown its true strength, not with firepower, not with warships, but with intelligence, ingenuity, and willpower. He turned back to the console as the final phase of the ship's systems came online. The Aegis's AI, once a tool for healing, now stood as the last line of defense for humanity's message. Dr. Kane had made sure of it. The raider ships, floating lifelessly in space, were no longer a threat. Their weapons were neutralized, their engines dead, crew trapped or destroyed. The galaxy's enemies had learned a costly lesson today, but Kane knew the war was not over. This was only the first battle in a much larger war, a war for humanity's place in the galaxy. A war to reclaim the respect that had been stolen from them for centuries. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. This victory would echo in the halls of every interstellar government, every empire, every faction that had ever thought of humans as weak or insignificant. Today, humanity had sent its message. Loud and clear, we are not to be underestimated. In the quiet of the command room, Kane took a deep breath. His hands hovered over the console, still processing what had just transpired. The ship's autopilot kicked in and the Aegis slowly began to turn, its sleek form cutting through the stars. It would not return to its original mission of healing, of aiding the wounded, but it had a new purpose now. It would be a symbol, a beacon for all to see. Suddenly, a soft beep echoed through the quiet room. A message had come through on the encrypted comms system. Kane's heart skipped a beat as he opened the transmission, fully expecting it to be a routine message from the Federation's command, or possibly even a transmission from the raider fleet that had managed to survive the attack, but it was neither. The message was brief, yet it carried weight heavier than anything he had ever received before. It was a transmission from an unknown source, a source that had been listening in on the entire battle. Humanity is not as weak as we once thought. The message continued. We've watched your actions today, Kane, and you've changed. The balance has shifted. You've shown us all that human intelligence is a force to be reckoned with. Dr. Kane's mind raced as he tried to piece together the origin of the message. Who could it be? Who had been watching? He had anticipated this, expected the galaxy to respond to his victory, but this was something else. The unknown sender wasn't interested in a simple victory celebration. This was something far more significant, a recognition of humanity's potential. He knew, deep down, that this wasn't the last they'd hear from whoever had sent the message. The galaxy would now be watching closely. Every empire, every faction, would now be wary of humanity's rise. It was only a matter of time before they would be forced to take a stand. To answer humanity's challenge, Dr. Kane sat back in his chair, a sense of calm falling over him. He had not just defended humanity, he had ushered in a new era, one where the human race would no longer be pushed aside. This was only the beginning. As the Aegis sailed quietly through the stars, Kane looked out at the endless black expanse, a sense of purpose filling him. He was no longer just a scientist. Today he had become a symbol, a leader of a new world, a world where intelligence, strategy, and courage were more powerful than any weapon. And he knew that, eventually, the galaxy would have to reckon with the human spirit. That message flashed across the screen once more. Humanity's genius will be remembered, and we will not forget. Dr. Kane allowed himself a moment to absorb the weight of those words. It was a victory, yes, but it was also a promise. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity stood up and declared that it would not be subdued. As the Aegis moved deeper into the vast unknown, its journey far from over, Kane made a silent vow to the universe. This was only the beginning.